monitoring financial services, dealing with large amounts of data, performing important calculations, and having minimal downtime. Our next speaker is going to talk just about such a use case. Let's welcome Robert Howe, Chief Technology Officer from CISO, West Highland Support Services.
Hello, my name is Robert Howe, and I'm from West Highland Support Services. I've been with West Highland for roughly 17 years, and I've been using Zabbix since early 2009. Let me take you a quick walkthrough of what West Highland is, and then we can go on with our presentation. West Highland Support Services is a premier market data managed service provider. We service many different verticals as well as many different client types, including things like investment banks, asset managers, hedge funds, brokers, market data vendors. Just about you name it in the financial industry, we're helping them out in some way or form. The tool that we have decided to use since roughly 2009 has been Zabbix. So a little bit of the agenda for today, is very simple. We're going to go through a little bit of the history, what is market data, the financial vertical problem, critical metrics, and some fun templates that we've used to get good information. Also, we'll go into some of the reporting side and what the end benefit to our clients is. So just a little bit of history, as I mentioned before. In 2009, we started using Zabbix to replace a commercially available tool known as ITRS. ITRS at the time was a very expensive tool for clients to get, and it really only served one or two purposes for a client, and that was to monitor what they call a Refinitiv or a Triarch system. Zabbix gave us a unique opportunity to venture outside of that one little niche application and really open up to other verticals. We first started in March of 2009, deploying it to roughly 20 servers. We ran it with version 1.8. There was lots of growing pains related to the database and the amount of data we were collecting, so that was a little bit of a surprise, but we worked through it. Later, we started finding out is the out-of-the-box templates, although they are very well done initially, they really didn't work in a market data setup. We later upgraded to Zabbix 2.0 in 2019, and then later deployed Zabbix 4, and then quickly went from 4.2 to 4.4, and then right to 5.0. Can't wait for Zabbix 6.0. Currently running Zabbix 5.0.15, and currently, I'm going to say this over and over again, dashboards are 100% key to our environments. So for the people on the call who don't know, what is market data? So market data is financial information about stocks. So for example, real time is what is Google trading at right now? Quote data, what is Google worth right now? Trade data, what did someone else just buy Google for? Reference data, who is the shareholders of Google? And then there's always historical data, which is give me the last 30 years of the Google's closing price. So the financial services, the biggest problem about the financial services is they are very scared. They don't like open source technology. They liked everything being very closed. So in order to get into the financial services industry, we really had to be proven at multiple different clients and showing the value of Zabbix. Some of the clients were early adopters and others were very late adopters. Zabbix really gave us the ability to really peel back that onion for the market data space to be able to say, hey, open source is not a bad thing. We have this great tool that can pull data into a centralized dashboard or what we call a single pane of glass, and you can see everything. And you're not paying a ton of money for a little piece of software that doesn't do everything you need it to do. So within the market data space, lots of people are worried about things like latency. Like, what is latency? Latency is how long it takes a message to get from point A to point B. But when we're talking about latency, we're not talking about ping latency. We're talking about how long it takes for a message to get from the exchange where the message started through the aggregation providers, through a circuit, and then delivered to a client service. And the way clients are determining this now is, am I better off being in a closer data center to the carrier, to the exchange, or am I better off being closer to the aggregator instead of the exchange? So you're seeing a big shift in different technologies that are happening right now. Then we go into, why do we care about things like volume? Volume is, how much can our system really handle? At what point does something really break? So we want to know what the peak of the volume was and be able to plan against that going forward, and always have a cushion level. So we do analysis, we do benchmarking, we be able to identify, hey, this is the peak that we can sustain. And at what point are we going to see problems? And Zabbix has been critical to be able to help us identify when we're going to have a problem, as well as tracking our current values. Tons of the tools out there don't do trending. I think it's the best thing in the whole wide world, because I don't want to keep all this history data. It's horrible. Trending is the best. So anybody who says you need to have every single drop of data, I say no. Trending data is the best. Oops, sorry. Most of the tools we have, it's a snapshot and it's a data field grid, and that's about all you're going to get. Zabbix really gave us the ability to see all the data. Initially it was a little bit clumsy to be able to get around to find stuff, but once you integrate with those dashboards, really made a huge difference. All the other tools didn't integrate with any other systems. They were very close-minded. You buy this tool for this tool. You'd buy this tool for this app, and nothing was connected. And don't even ask about things like SNMP, because none of that stuff would work. So let's talk about some of the critical metrics for market data. So market data, it's as fast as things can go, but you want it as reliable as you can go. So when it comes to the market data systems, people are not as pushing for the least latent anymore, or the lowest latency. Now they're pushing for consistent latency. So they want a system that is running around the same latency every day, no matter what the conditions are in the environment. So let's talk about what are the critical metrics. Network bandwidth, #1 metric by far. I could be looking at thousands of different metrics, but by #1, I always look at the network bandwidth, because it tells me the most what's going on. Every box has 3 to 4 network interfaces. Either it's a client-side interface that has 1 or 2 of them, they have a messaging backbone, they have a feed network, and all these networks range anywhere from 1 gig all the way up to 25 gig. Per processor CPU usage. All of our processes are bound core by core for optimal performance. So you're talking about boxes that have 20 plus cores. Power management of those cores, very important. Then we go into things like distribution cache, update rates, and even number of TCP sessions. All these combine, and we can see this all very easily right through Zabbix. So I'm going to walk you through one of our first iterations through Zabbix, where we learned how the standard templates didn't really work in our case. And we tried and tried, and we couldn't make it work well. So here's an example of standard network monitoring. We're looking at interfaces through Zabbix. And you'll see this is sampling at 30-second intervals. And this is about 40 megabits per second. Not a significant amount of data. But when we look at the Zabbix enhanced monitoring that we put together, and we can actually see those numbers have gone all the way up to past 2.5 gigs. So, when you're dealing with a market data system and you've got a Unix guy or a Linux guy, or even somebody in purchasing who's like, you're not even using the network interface. I'm like, oh yes we are, watch this. And then they're like, whoa, that's a big difference. And now they're willing to shed out a lot more money for network gear, network cards, everything. So the way we managed to handle this is we turned this into a conflated service. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more right here. So here's an example of a 10-second sample window. So for simplicity, it shows 100 data points, 10 seconds at 10 100 millisecond samples. Traditional monitoring would probably grab the peak of this of about 90 megabits per second. Conflating the data to get the peak of the 10-second window grabs this as 700 megabits per second. This is not a combined over the period, it's the peak. So this has been really helpful because with market data, everything is this huge bursty traffic. You know, we don't get this build up, it's just boom, now the market has, you know, crashed the system. Same thing we did for CPU monitoring. You know, monitoring every single CPU, especially if you have 20 cores or even 30 cores, you know, trying to do 30-second, 1-second samples on those boxes, you know, you're going to be filling up your database with ridiculous amounts of metrics. And in the end, it doesn't really help you that much more. So what we're doing here is we're just using some wrappers, right? Simply using mpstat and user parameters. And we simply say, give me this peak over the last 30 seconds. Or actually in this case, it's the valley over the last 30 seconds. And we're able to identify when that CPU goes really far down. And from here, we're able to see what happened during that Fed announcement. We can say, look, our CPU did hit a little bit lower at that point. And that CPU, when we hover over it with the dashboard, we're able to identify which core it is and then tie it back to the proper process. Sorry. Other tools that we ended up developing were things like using turbostat, which we found was crippling the box on Intel Skylake processors. You know, even if you have the BIOS set and max CPU power management, it was going down to under 300 megahertz, which is absolutely ridiculous. But after we disabled the power management in Linux as well as in the BIOS, we maxed out the CPU at 2.8 gigahertz, and we had zero issues from that point in time. And we were able to prove it using Zabbix and using the turbostat tools to identify it. Super helpful. I'd like to walk you through how some of our tools are actually working today and how we're doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'll go to our next slide here and be able to walk you through it. So we've got our data notification manager, which is a separate tool we have, and we monitor it directly using ODBC calls. Great use for the tool. We have another tool called Alive, which is actually collecting our latency that we were talking about earlier from all of these different systems like Solace, Bloomberg, and TREP. And we're now able to pull it using ODBC to get some of the sampling and then do the alerting, because the Alive uses Grafana, and the alerting in Grafana is just not the best yet. We have other tools, things like the Solace REST APIs, where we're pulling 300 plus thousand metrics per device. So if you have an environment with 5 or 6 Solace devices, you're at like 1.5 million metrics being monitored. And we're sampling those typically at about 45 seconds intervals. Things like Bloomberg, we're using a Java app that we developed, and it's every single one of these uses Zabbix Sender very much, except for the ODBC calls. And then with our TREP, we actually just have a simple shared memory parser, and then it sends data again with Zabbix Sender. So I'm going to take you back in time a little bit. So back when we had Zabbix 2.0 and Zabbix 1.8, you know, we were trying to make a more useful system of Zabbix, and that was using things like MySQL calls. That was using things like little front end pages. And what I learned very quickly was it wasn't a good idea, because things change, and when you start trying to mess with the PHP code, you're asking for it. So when we started migrating to Zabbix 5.0, I said no more of that. And what we decided to implement was a very simple index that has an overlap and an iframe. I don't love the iframe, but it keeps us in a simple way, and I keep on doing updates as soon as they come out, and I haven't had any issues. The only minor thing that changes once in a while is like the name of a PHP page that we use often changes, or the name of a dashboard. It's really helpful, and our clients really are happy with it. some of the things that we've been able to do with Zabbix that used to take much longer to do. Here's an example of a status report. These status reports used to take, at least 10 minutes to generate, just because there were so many different metrics out there. And now we can literally click a button, and within 2 seconds, we have the entire status of the environment, and a client is very happy understanding if everything is up and running. And that is thanks to the Zabbix API. Things like capacity planning. Now, this doesn't use the Zabbix API, but this has been super helpful for many years now. And basically what we do is we look at different metrics within Zabbix, and then we're able to look at the trended data over time to identify what the daily high was. What is it compared to the benchmark? Is it higher than yesterday? Is it higher for the week? Is it higher than a month or higher than a yearly high? And you can see when we have those yearly highs, they go nice and red and very obvious to see. So this has been something that's been super awesome in our market data space. Now, what does this turn into for our clients? They get real-time alerting, they get millisecond data, they get instant notification as issues occur, proactive monitoring, capacity planning, and just a deep level of understanding what's going on in their environment at any given time. West Highland is the best-in-class managed service that is out there. We are a small little niche. In order to be in this vertical, you need to know somebody. You need to have the right tools. You're not going to get into this environment and be, okay, I'm going to just bring this up and start working with it. You're working with a team. You're identifying with a team. You're going through all the data. It's super important, and it's a very good niche market. We've got lots of different verticals. I would love to discuss more of them, but I know we're short for time today. I really appreciate everybody for watching this, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Robert. It's always great to see more use cases, especially in different fields like these. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. Either Robert will answer them, or if you have more general questions about Zabbix, how they're related to this use case, or something else, one of our team members can also help you out. Thank you.